Thanks, Goose. All right, Barjo, you ready for the Dark Souls review?
It's hard to describe to non-Souls players or outsiders just why these games are so compelling. There's an unspoken bond that unites Souls players. It's a bond that's born from pain, from death, but most importantly, from conquest. They share memories of what is truly a long, tough journey across an unforgiving land. Dark Souls 2 is the third game in this notoriously difficult series. Demon's Souls started it, Dark Souls set the bar, and Dark Souls 2 refines it. You start your journey with no quests, no goals, and no idea what you're supposed to be doing. Instantly, the stillness of this new world sets the tone. As you see fellow travelers, ghostly shadows, and bloodstains, you can't help but feel lost in a helpless purgatory. Like you don't matter at all, like no one in this world really does.
A great king built a great kingdom. One day, you will stand before its decrepit gate without really knowing why.
The core progression hasn't changed much. You explore, level up, find and reinforce gear until you're tough enough to get through to the next area. Fights are tough, and even basic enemies will pose a challenge. One tiny lapse in concentration and it can all be over, sending you back to the bonfire, risking every soul you earned along the way. You're subtly pulled through this game by untraveled forks in the road, blocked paths that you know one day you'll be able to reach, and shiny loot that's just out of your grasp. The best part about this game is that there are just so many enemies to work through, each with their own speed, strengths, armor types, debuffs, and attack patterns. I can't think of another game that comes close to this level of complexity in this kind of combat. Each encounter feels carefully thought out to challenge you in new ways. It really is a large-scale gauntlet of a game. Character customization has had a complete overhaul. Now you can make your hero look like an Oompa Loompa if you wish. And I did wish. And then you put a helmet on them to never see their face again.
Be gone.
There's more NPCs to meet along the way now.
Young undead.
If it would not trouble you, could you visit my abode just down the way?
And their morbid stories of exhaustion and helplessness just add to the tone.
You must forge on to bring an end to your journey and mine.
But it's not the NPCs that tell the story in Dark Souls 2. It's more of a gut feeling. It's story told without words, painted by the walls and the creatures around you. For example, you may wander into some deep underground cavern only to find pirates and strange creatures that like the shadows. And then when you finally do reach the boss, everything you've witnessed and explored starts to make some sense without ever actually saying a word of dialogue. And there are so many locations to explore with such contrast in their themes. Light is a more important feature now. Certain creatures fear light, but mostly you'll use it to mark where you've been, and they stay lit. Conceptually, this mechanic is so interesting, not just for its practical purposes, but as I moved through the land, I found myself wanting to light up the dark, as if my light was cleansing the world from its curse. There's a handful of other big changes. You can now teleport right from the start to any bonfire that you've lit. I'm not completely sold on this idea. Having to walk between zones in Dark Souls 1 reinforced the clever way that world jigsawed together. Sadly, some of that is lost with 2, even though the level design is just as clever. Another big change is that now if you kill an enemy a fairly large amount of times, they won't respawn when you go to the bonfire. This is a fundamental tweak to the Souls system, and my first reaction was panic, but actually, it's great. Not only does this stop soul farming, which isn't very practical anyway, but it also means if you're struggling in a boss fight, eventually the path to the boss clears up a bit. This speeds things up without removing too much challenge. But to offset this, now each time you die, your maximum health will actually lower until it reaches a threshold at about halfway, and the only way you can restore this is with a human effigy, which are in limited supply. But this is also great because not only does it make death more stressful, but it also adds a physical loss to a finite resource with every fall. If I had one major criticism, I'd say that poison is a little overused and at times feels cheap. But this is Dark Souls. It pretty much has a blank check when it comes to punishment. You signed up for this the moment you press start. One welcome improvement is how you can respec your character if you find a particular rare item. And this is great if you find a weapon later in the game that you love but can't use really because you've already committed levels in another direction. A common complaint in the last games. And there's so much gear now and more freedom with weapon augments, and there's heaps of shields with different stats. And I find the more that you play with gear and the more things you switch up, the more fun it is. Especially with rings, now you have 4 slots and there are some amazing rings that all affect strategy. The old sun ring is my favourite. Take too much damage and it unleashes a fiery burst around you. That has saved my butt more than once. I think you could say that ring's a bit overpowered, but it doesn't really mean anything when you meet a boss like this. He makes the Capra demon from the last game feel like he belongs in Fable 3. So the big question is Dark Souls 2 harder than the other games? I think that's a matter of perspective. I'd say yes, it is harder in parts. It certainly has a better tutorial and opening section, which helps with the learning controls. But that helps you for about 10 minutes. If you have played through the other games, then I think you'll probably beat many of these bosses first go. The good news is, there are heaps of them, and they all have unique and interesting mechanics. And each enemy in this game is animated so gracefully. It's beautiful creature work. But you're still likely to meet enemies that feel impossible at first. And there are many times where you'll be in a pit of despair, not knowing where to go, what lies behind the next fog wall, what half of the stuff in your inventory is even for. And that's the beauty of the Souls design, confusion. This all makes you a cautious player, a hoarder, and also appreciate that everything is finite. Sadly, the servers weren't live at the time of review, so we couldn't test out any of the online covenants or do any co-op or PvP, and that's a huge part of the game. But it certainly seems to have a larger focus, and that's a good thing. I think the hardest thing for newcomers to the Souls series is thinking of death as punishment or loss. But it's not that at all. Death brings this game to life. It makes the person behind the controller stronger, not the character you're playing. I know this game isn't for everyone, but I kind of want everyone to play it just a little bit, because in a time where games are getting easier and holding your hand all the way to the very end, Dark Souls 2 is holding its ground, saying no, no, not today, you need to earn it. I'm giving Dark Souls 2 9.5 out of 10 rubber chickens. All right, let's do this.